Godzilla, King of Monsters, spends its entire runtime flip-flopping between an absolute spectacle and a bore, and for that reason, it's one of the more interesting films I've seen this year. It is the popcorn flick of the year so far, but there's so much more to the film than that. Here's how to enjoy. Let's get right into the strongest part of this film, the kaiju, both literally and figuratively. When the kaiju are on screen and duking it out, the film is nothing short of a spectacle. The battles have an epic sense of scale to them and are aided fantastically by some chilling sound design. The kaiju feel as big as they look. Every footstep and attack shook the theatre. The only setback is that the kaiju felt a little too weightless in parts. When I noticed this in the film, my mind immediately shot to Pacific Rim. In that film, the sound design worked in tandem with the motion of the Jaegers to make them feel real and weighty. This alone was one of Pacific Rim's strongest points. Godzilla falls short in comparison because whilst the sound design is firing on all cylinders, the actual movement of the kaiju is a little too fast to really hammer home the sheer size of them. However, when the scene is shot from a human perspective, the kaiju feel just as massive and terrifying as they are intended to. Speaking of the humans, there were some pretty fantastic ones in this film. Bradley Whitford provided some nice, if not out-of-place, comic relief, and Ken Watanabe and Sally Hawkins were a fantastic foil to Vera Farmiga. But the absolute standout in this film was Millie Bobby Brown. She is seriously one of the best actors, not young actors, working today. The fact that she was in this film with the likes of Vera and Sally and was still the highlight is an absolute testament to just how good of an actor she is. If you loved Millie in Stranger Things and just want to see more of her on screen, then I could easily recommend just seeing this film for that reason alone. Whilst the acting is fantastic, the plot is not. Before getting into the negatives, however, there is one thing that the plot does very well in my opinion. It creates a very interesting predicament for the cast, and each side has their own unique solution to the problem with their own merits and risks. On paper, it is an extremely interesting plot, but the film doesn't seem to know what to do with it entirely. The human conflict could be interesting, but it's not built upon enough to really have weight. The story gets lost in kaiju mythos too much to focus on where it's actually going, and while I found it all interesting to an extent, it made the movie feel much longer than it actually was. And being above 2 hours, that's not something to aim for. The plot is definitely the weakest aspect of this film, and it's a shame because what is presented is interesting, and it was refreshing to see two solutions to a problem disagreeing, but in the end, all of this is dropped and the plot shifts gears again to come to a conclusion that still left me unsatisfied. Despite being under the veil of a dumb popcorn flick, the film did try to not treat its audience like an idiot, which was very refreshing. Things happened without needless exposition, especially in the first act. Whilst the pacing was off as a whole, skipping on some of the exposition did help a little bit, but the amount of exposition still left in the film was still too much. It really felt like this film could find no middle ground between doing everything right and doing everything wrong, and this is only exemplified in the camera work. I think the likes of John Wick, Mission Impossible and Edgar Wright films have spoiled me with clear, easy to follow action. This film had that when the kaiju were the focus, with gorgeous wide shots that fully showcased their sheer scale. The camera work on a small scale was also fantastic. Close-ups, conversations, and demonstrating the size of the kaiju from a human level were done fantastically. The big problem came when scenes would flip between the humans and the kaiju. The camera had a horrific habit of being shakier than a chihuahua in a freezer, and it made scenes a mess to watch. The worst part is that the shaky cam would be intertwined with the fantastic wide shots I talked about earlier. It made for a very uneven experience. The production design doesn't do a lot to aid the visuals either. There are some very interesting designs in the Monarch sites, but that's the extent of it. Everything else is either generic future backdrop or rubble with fire. Like with everything else in this movie, the production design is either fantastic or generic with no middle ground. I wanted to see more of the different Monarch sites, but the pacing of the film didn't allow for that. My biggest problem with the film links back to the plot. There will be spoilers in this part, so skip to this time if you don't want to be spoiled. Remember how I said that the film did a pretty decent job of not treating the viewer like an idiot? Well, it goes too far in one scene and completely took me out of the movie. At the start of the movie, the military wants to destroy the kaijus. This is all well and good. Some exposition has been put in place. The problem I have is that the military show up in the second act with a WMD that had no forewarning, made no sense, and only served to take the plot on a further detour, which destroyed the pacing further. Overall, Godzilla, King of Monsters is interesting. It does some things very well, but it also does some things very poorly. Despite all of its shortcomings, this is definitely a film to see on the big screen. The spectacle of the kaiju battles coupled with a fantastic sound design is truly something to experience. Hey, it's the end card. If you made it this far and enjoyed what you saw, why not consider subscribing? It really helps me out and it helps me get my channel out there. Hopefully I will see you all in my review for X-Men Dark Phoenix.